Welcome back to Mastering 3D in Photoshop. My name is Kirk Nelson. We find ourselves now on chapter number 2, in where we are working on creating this 3D planet. And this is lesson number 10, where we take a closer look at UV mapping. Before we return to our digital Earth file, I want to talk a little bit about what UVs mean for texture mapping. Now here I've got a regular square blank file open in Photoshop. I'm going to turn that background layer into just a regular layer, and I'm going to fill it with a cloud pattern. But I'm going to hold down the Alt key. When I go to Filter, Render Clouds, that creates a more intense cloud pattern. Okay, and then I will switch to the 3D workspace and create a postcard from that layer. And if you'll remember, what that does is it maps this texture to this 3D plane. So I can move that around here. Zoom out a little bit so you get a better look at it. Because what I want to do is show you exactly what's going on with this texture map. If I go down to my layer 0 texture, you can see it's mapped to the diffuse, which is what we expect. Now, if we go to the Edit UV Properties, we get this pop-up window here that talks about the U scale, the V scale, and the offsets. Now think of U and V coordinates similar to X and Y coordinates, but it's following along the surface of the mesh. So right now that makes sense because one is U, one is V. It's just like we said, the regular X and Y that we're used to thinking about with 2D graphs. But if this surface was curved at all, or if it was irregular, anything other than a plane, it would follow along that. So a way to thinking about it is it's just like the X and Y coordinates of a sticker that's going along the surface. So why is that necessary or even needed to be known? Because often these values will be scaled. So if we scale up, say the U scale to 400%. Now that's repeating that texture 4 times across in the U axis. We'll do the same thing in the V axis. It's repeating 8 times. And if we look in closer, you can see the seams between those. Let's open that properties panel again. Now the offset does about what you would expect it to do. It means you shove it over to the side or up and down. Now the reason I wanted to talk about this is because these seams are a really important part of working with 3D. Anytime that you're creating a texture that you know is going to repeat, you want to make it what is known as seamless or repeatable. And let's talk about how to do that. Now let's go and edit that texture. Well, it looks pretty good from here, but what's happening is as this repeats, so this right edge gets lined up against this left edge, you can see the visible seam there. So how do we get rid of that? Well, let's go to Filter, Other, Offset. In here, we can shove those seams around so that we can see them a little bit better. Because as long as we have the undefined areas as wrap around and the offsets and the horizontal and verticals, we can see where that seam is going to be. Because we wrap these around, we know that these edges are going to line up. So essentially what we've done is made these seams visible so that we can paint them out. Let's grab our spot healing brush. That's set to content aware. It's really the easiest way to take care of something like this. Zip it across, zip it down. It does a decent job, but we could probably do with a little bit of touch-up too. A little bit of clone brushing never hurt anybody. Now you want to be careful when you get around the edges because you want to make sure you're not creating more seams where there wasn't some before. Of course, you can run that offset filter again just to make sure. But then when you're done with it, you can update that 3D file and all those seams disappear. As a really quick aside, if you create documents that are a power of 2, the cloud filter is automatically seamless. So if you go to File, New, and you create these in a pixel dimension that is divisible by a power of 2. Now that's 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 1024. These are so-called magic numbers when it comes to creating texture maps. Because if we do the cloud filter on these, Filter, Render, Clouds, watch this, Filter, Other, Offset, there's no seams. Photoshop automatically renders the cloud filters to be completely seamless only on files that are a power of 2 dimension. Within your course files, you will find 4 texture maps to be used with this lesson. The idea here is that we are going to create sort of an energy field shell around our Earth. Make it look really sci-fi like somebody was able to construct some force field that's protecting the planet. And to create that in 3D, I've got these 4 texture maps that we're going to work with. This glow map here is essentially the color, this bright blue energy color that will be for the force field. The illumination map is the glowing portions of it. The opacity map shows which parts will be visible, and then the bump map will give it a little bit of bump to it. So it's like these seams in between these hex plates are not raised up to be quite as high as the plates themselves. So here's our blue marble again. Once more, let's go to the 3D panel. And this time I'm going to create yet another copy of this clouds sphere. Duplicate this again. And this one will be the force field. And let's make sure it gets scaled up significantly larger. So 12.88 for this. And then let's edit that material. First of all, we need to throw away the one that's already on there from the clouds. All right, now let's map the diffuse to that glow map. That's the color for our force field. Now you'll notice it's not mapping around there properly. So let's edit those UV properties. Let's change the U scale to 600 and the V scale to 300. You'll probably notice that I did make sure that these textures all tile properly within those texture maps. All right, I don't want the poles of the force field to be completely aligned with the poles of the planet, so I'm going to rotate those around just a little bit, just so it's a little bit askew and it looks more like that there's no pinching that's visible in the main view of those textures, because I don't like the way those hexes look when they're pinched up there. So now we'll continue on with the rest of the material work and move on to changing the color of the specular. Let's change that to a fairly bright color because this is an energy field. And likewise with the ambient, but I want to put the ambient at mid-tone gray. Let's add that opacity map. We'll map that. Load texture. That's an opacity map 2. And we'll need to make sure that those UV properties match the UV properties that we put in for the diffuse mapping too. That was 600 by 300. So we get some neat hexes floating over the planet there. But now let's add an illumination map too. The Illumin map. And again, let's map those UV properties. Increase the shine to about 70% and add that bump map in. And then as a final touch, I'm going to increase the refraction to 1.5. And what that does is changes the way the light bends when it's passing through the thickness of this material. Now, if it's set to 1, it just goes straight through like it's air. If it's set to 1.5, it makes the material appear to have a bit of thickness to it, because what you see through it will have a slight bend or offset to it, as if you're looking through glass or water. At this point, we have all of our force field attributes set up. It's time to push the render button. And there we go. Now that's a pretty neat looking render. Looks like we've got a cool blue glowing energy force field around the planet. And that brings lesson 10 to an end. Now in lesson 11, we're going to deal with something that's really a little bit obscure and only useful to a limited number of projects, but I think it's going to help us here. That's working with a cross section, just to create another rendered element to help with the compositing of our Earth force field scene.